Welcome to the Best Movie Ever podcast. The only podcast with 3 people with cotton balls in their mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Across from me is Sarah Mullins.
Hi.
Sitting to my right is Nighthawk 69.
Please, you can call me RJ. We're going to make them a podcast they can't refuse.
Oh, you come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding to shoot a podcast. How dare you disrespect me? Cotton balls in your mouth.
They have a flavor to them. I'm really upset.
I can't. I don't know how to do this.
Sarah's still sticking with
Oh,
it.
you're very
Do your impression.
sticking with the
You
bit.
clearly
Do the
want to
bit. Do the bit.
Do the Brando.
Look at what they done to my son.
Look at what they've done to my boy.
All right, well, welcome to the Best Movie Ever podcast.
That went swimmingly.
That was the best. This is the podcast about
Oh
movies.
God, that was disgusting.
This is not the podcast about serial killers. This is not the podcast about cereal. This one's about movies, folks.
Yep. A podcast about movies. How novel.
How
Hasn't been one of
unique.
those before. So this is the Best Movie Ever podcast, the podcast where we are going to watch every single best picture ever and then decide which ones suck the most shit.
That's what this is?
Yeah. So you were going to be watching, hundreds upon hundreds of hours, some black and white, and then 2 Godfathers, which is what we
started
this week. Yeah.
Let me ask you this before we get too deep. How many movies, how many best pictures have there been?
There have been.
Is it like 90?
Drum roll.
Something like 90?
91 Best Picture movies.
That's an odd number.
Yes. So there will be a wild card.
There is a wild card. Yes.
One movie will just get into the races at some point, and
Okay.
we'll just throw it in there. But this week we watched The Godfather and Godfather Part 2. So what we're gonna do is take all the Best Picture winners of all time, and we've sort of put them in a bracket system, sort of like a March Madness bracket. And they're going to go head to head, and then each week we're going to decide which movie goes on to the second round, and then what movies get eliminated. So this week we watched The Godfather, and RJ, I'd love to know, how was your watch of The Godfather?
It was good. So for confessions right off the bat, I don't know about you guys, but I had never seen either of these films.
No, I had seen The Godfather. I'd never seen The Godfather Part 2.
Which is so weird. As 3 pop culture junkies, you can't help but kind of ingest a lot of just what The Godfather is. I have to tell you, this was not what I thought The Godfather was about. I did not think this was The Godfather, and it was delightful. I liked it.
Okay, then I guess we should ask, what did you think The Godfather was?
Yeah, I'd love to know what The Godfather was in your mind's eye.
Okay.
Going into
so I was basing my knowledge of The Godfather mainly on a film called Mafia, starring Jay Moore from, I believe, the late 90s. Are you familiar with Mafia?
I'm not familiar
I
with
have
it.
no
It is
idea.
like a scary movie-esque broad parody of gangster movies, and heavily influenced by The Godfather, also heavily influenced by Goodfellas. And so it's not The Godfather, but I thought that it was just like a and it wasn't that. I guess like that my big takeaway is it was like incredibly long. I love having watched The Godfather. Can't say I totally enjoyed every millisecond of watching The Godfather. What, for both movies, we were talking like 7 hours of
Yeah, it was like
work that I put in to be on your podcast?
It was like, well, the first one was just under 3 hours. Godfather 2 is 3 hours and 20 minutes, which I felt every single minute of.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
First initial thoughts, Sarah, about The Godfather. What did you think about it?
Well, I'd seen it before,
Yeah.
and I'd liked it before. So going into it, there were a lot of things that I didn't remember, having seen it maybe a few years ago in college. But I think that overall, it sort of lived up to my expectations of having seen it before. So I wasn't surprised or upset terribly.
I love the opening of the movie.
Yes.
Oh, that one long shot
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, well, it begins, and the theme comes over, and immediately you get a smile on your face. You're like, oh yeah, this song's coming through, and then it cuts to that like long shot on the guy telling the Godfather, I need a favor from you, and just pulls out all the way to right behind Brando's head, and then the idea that there's this big gathering happening all around them, this giant wedding for the sister, Connie, at the same time. And the whole atmosphere of that wedding is so amazing to start a film with.
It's pretty rad. And I also think it's an incredible accomplishment that a movie that was made in the 70s, and I know it's not set in the 70s, but still a miracle that everybody at this wedding like is dressed cool. Like weddings in the 70s were embarrassing. Like if you look at our parents' wedding pictures, it's terrifying. And so that was my first thought. I was like, oh, this is the only cool looking wedding that existed in the 70s, and it was put to film, thank God. But it's also like the start of something that I struggled with is, so you go in with these certain touchstones to the Godfather. You come to me on the day of my,
Yes. gotta get that.
You come to me on the day of this, my daughter's
yeah, not
Come
a
to me
good
on the day
taste.
of my daughter's wedding.
Yeah.
Mine kind of sounds like Christopher Walken.
Yeah, that's
Like
I said that
Christopher
last
Walken
night.
with
At the
cotton balls
dentist.
in his
Yeah,
mouth.
that was his inspiration. I think Brando was just like, I want to do walk-in, but coming out of the dentist.
Yes.
But so I'm watching this movie. I'm seeing things that I'm familiar with, but then it became clear that like the reason these things became pop culture touchstones is the movie, in my opinion, forces you to see them as that. Like I was surprised when someone said, "You know the rule. You can go to the Godfather on the day of his daughter's wedding and ask him and like a genie, he has to do it." And that was surprising to me. It's like, oh, it's like an actual rule in this mafia, which kind of blew my mind. It's like if Darth Vader said, "I am your father" in like every movie, just like really like being like, this is a cultural touchstone. I don't know. That surprised me.
I think every 10 to 15 minutes or so, I was like, oh yeah, this scene. And that wedding, I had a vivid memory of that moment where it was either detectives or the reporters were taking down the license plates outside of it.
Oh, right.
It was the
outside of
FBI,
wedding.
FBI,
yeah. So this entire ecosystem of everyone's having fun, but then there's like the FBI on the outside trying to figure out who is in there right now.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a Shakespearean play opening, I thought too.
I was thinking like a little Game of Thronesy too, like this whole like, especially once you open it up to the other families and kind of see the struggle there. I think there's a lot owed to Godfather. It's fascinating. Another thing about that wedding that I'll be looking at my phone throughout. It's not because I'm rude. I took notes. So at this wedding, we meet all the characters, including Michael, who's going to be our main dude with the main arc. And immediately I thought it was like pretty shitty of him not to give his date like a heads up of what the family does.
Well, he shows up late to his, he didn't go to the ceremony of his sister's wedding. He just showed up late to the reception.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, wow. I like from the very beginning, you're sort of like, okay, Michael doesn't want to be a part of this mafia aspect of his family, but also he just didn't show up to his sister's wedding.
Brando, Vito Corleone, is looking through the window the entire time like,
Is Michael here?
Yeah.
Hey, have you seen Michael?
so like this whole like, it's almost like Hal from Henry IV Part 1 or 2. It's like the boy king, and like the king is looking for him, like he's got to be out there somewhere.
Sure.
But we don't even see Michael until it must be like 20 minutes.
20
into
minutes
the
in the movie,
and then he's off on the outskirts the entire time. We've seen Sonny, we've seen Tom by then, all of the other like main characters, but Michael's there with Kay, just like, my family kills people.
Yeah.
Like, is this
Just
the
a
first
heads
date,
up.
the second date?
It is crazy. Well, they've got to be together for a while because she comes to a family wedding.
Yeah.
And it's weird. You prep someone when you bring families are weird. And so the first thing you say is like, oh yeah, my family's in the mafia. Everyone calls my dad the Godfather, but he's not really everyone's Godfather. That might be a confusing detail you should understand before showing up. I don't know. I thought it was a dirty move on Michael's part. I think the movie is the arc of his corruption. I think he's already corrupt from the get. He's just not sharing stuff with his significant other. That's dirty.
It's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then also in the middle of that wedding, that famous singer shows up, and everyone loses their fucking mind. The Beatles arrive.
That doesn't go well. It eventually leads to the stuff in LA.
Yeah.
The iconic horse head.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
horse
yeah,
head
yeah.
is connected to that. So I guess that just serves as like, here's a little taste of the world that we're in, because it doesn't really come back to play unless I miss something.
Well, like
No.
Michael alludes to the fact that his father kills people and has people killed, I should say.
Right.
In the wedding when he's talking to Kay, but the first time you actually see anything that gets killed, not anybody but anything, is the horse's head.
Sure. So it's like a necessary beat for you to be like, these are the stakes. This is where we're at. It is like a horrifying. That's another thing I was familiar with, but to like see it in the context was like, it's pretty intense.
The first time you see any blood in this mafia movie is the horse in the bed. The location, I think it's called the Beverly House, which we had just watched The Jerk maybe like a month back.
Oh, and they have a scene there too?
And that's the house that Maven Johnson gets at the end of The Jerk.
Oh, wow.
Because I recognize the backyard by the pool area, and I guess it's been in a couple other things too. But yeah, the idea that Tom comes and is just like, hey, you're gonna give him this part.
Yeah.
And then he's just like, you know what? I got to leave right away. I need a car because the Godfather likes to hear bad news immediately.
Yeah,
and then we
yeah.
get the horse, and then it's just, I think, death after that. We get strangling, shooting. But I gotta say, I didn't think Brando was gonna get knocked out so fast in that movie. I didn't remember that at all.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That was surprising to me too. And I didn't know. I didn't know. Again, I didn't know anything about the beats in this movie, so I thought that might have been it. I was like, "That's crazy that like Brando left such a mark with just being in this movie for that much," you know. But this that death scene and every death scene that follows, I thought the kills in this movie are like rad. Like I'm a huge horror guy, I'm a big gore guy, and like all of this stuff was top notch, upsetting, and great, and really really solid.
Was it the knife in the hand?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The knife in the hand, then the
as he
strangle.
gets strangled from behind. Yeah.
I think it's very progressive that all of their hitmen were the fat guys. I think like as a husky dude, I was like, yeah, we're the soldiers.
Well, they're the muscle.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true. It was muscle.
Well, then the orange. I mean, oranges are in pretty much every like 20, 30 minutes or so, you see an orange in this movie. And I'm sure there's like thesis papers that people have written about like,
I got thoughts on Godfather 2 and oranges. We'll get to it.
Yeah. But every time you see an orange, something bad happens to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
There's the iconic scene of him picking out the fruit. And I just love everywhere he goes, Vito Corleone is just walking up going like, yeah, give me that one. Yeah, that pepper. And like, I wonder if Brando is just fucking around on set. Like, give me a pepper, one strawberry, give me a blueberry. Because he seemed to be mindlessly just walking around.
This comes to the other thing about where I was coming from with this movie. Whenever you see an impression of Brando in this movie, it's so over the top, it's so heightened, it's so cartoony that in my head, I was like, oh, this performance is not necessarily bad, but dated. I assumed it would be dated and big, but it is so insanely small. It is like, I don't know, man. It really changed my brain about what this performance means to film history, because I think I just assumed people were making fun of it, but it's like Ledger's Joker is what it is. It's like, oh, it's so good, but everyone wants to try it, and then it becomes a parody of itself, you know?
Brando is notorious for being like the mumbler. Everything is so intimate with him.
Yeah.
And it's desperately iconic. Every scene he's in.
Yeah.
There's one scene in particular that I loved that's such a small moment with Brando is when Michael is in the hospital and
I love that scene.
He comes back up and he like takes Brando's hand and Brando's looking up at him and he looks so relieved and so happy that his son is there for him and is not necessarily in the mafia, but is acting like a member of the family for the first time that we've sort of seen him in the movie.
And I'll also say, I think I've never been so hungry for a rewatch right after watching a thing, because it does that thing that so many 70s movies do, and you're kind of hinting at this with meeting Michael so late in the game. You meet all these characters. It's kind of meandering. Nothing really seems to pull focus, and so you don't really know who your protagonist is. And it's like, I think like Alien comes to mind, like when they're like all on the ship just sort of kicking it and you're like, I don't know who I'm supposed to be latching onto now, and it all feels very improvisy. That I think I missed a lot of details in that wedding setup, and I'm hungry for a rewatch to watch the characters that I later learn more about, you know?
Did you have a favorite character overall? I mean, of
Well-
course, like we all love Vito Corleone, Marlon Brando,
Yeah.
but was there like a supporting character who like really popped out for you
I think I'd forgotten that Robert Duvall was in this movie
with hair?
with hair. And
Ish.
Yeah, a little bit of hair, and he loses it by the second.
I was like watching it and I was like, who is that? He looks so familiar and I can't figure out who it was. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, it's Robert Duvall. He looks great. And his whole character arc of you always sort of question, especially after Michael takes over, like, is he going to remain loyal with Michael in place when he gets sort of downgraded from consigliere?
Yeah.
Because he's like the adopted son.
The Jon Snow.
Yes, the Jon Snow.
Or the
of it.
Reek. Probably closer to the Reek. I think it's tough for me to answer the favorite side character thing because it might be because of Godfather Part 2, but like Fredo is a standout for me. But he's got a lot more to do in the second one, you know?
I liked Fredo a lot in the second one.
Yeah.
The first, he sort of like goes off. He's sort of
Vegas.
on the periphery.
Yeah.
And he's a wacky dude. Do you know, have they done like a supercut of this thing? I was looking on IMDb and it looked like there was something like that.
Now HBO did a 7.5 hour cut. That's a linear chronological story. So it begins with all that old Vito Corleone stuff as like a boy, and it goes to Michael, and then I guess the third movie, which is a terrible rating on Rotten Tomatoes, by the way.
Yeah, supposedly it's really bad.
Yeah, the first movie is like a 98%. Godfather 2 is 97, and then I think it's like 60 something.
Oh,
It's
wow.
68%.
I love the Rotten Tomatoes scores on some of these, and the audience score on this one I found a particularly wonderful one I'd like to share
This is
with
for
you.
The
now.
Godfather?
This is the original Godfather, one of the most overrated movies of all time. This flick is so slow, campy, and condescending to the audience. Like its star Marlon Brando, it tries hard to be cool and lives off of its unearned mystique. It was created, like so many movies in the 70s and 80s, to stroke the egos of Italian Americans.
Whoa.
So just popping right in here with the racism and Rotten
Wow.
Tomatoes. Especially those who romanticize the mafia. The movie takes itself too seriously, and like Satan, its power is overrated. This film belongs comfortably in the dustbin of history.
Wow. I will say that review was less predictable than The Godfather. I'll say that one. A lot of twists and turns in there.
The first time I saw this, I'll preface it by saying, was in high school. So I hadn't watched this movie since then. And I thought it ended the moment Brando sticks the oranges in his teeth and is like chasing around his godson? Or his
son.
His son.
Or no, his grandson.
Grandson, yeah.
He's like running around through the plants there, and he drops dead. I thought the movie ends right there, and there's a whole 40 minutes after that of Michael just killing all the people.
Killing all of his rivals. And then I will say though, where it does end, I really, really liked with Kay like staring through the door, and you sort of know that she knows that he was lying the whole time.
So I was waiting for that shot because Simpsons parodies that shot in an episode. And so I was like, when does that thing happen? And it's the last shot of the movie. It's just like, no women allowed. It's basically
no women in this movie.
yeah. In back to my favorite film of all time, Mafia. Please don't hold on to that
Jay
soundbite with Jay Moore's Mafia.
That's going to be on the board. Can we just get a clean one of Jay Moore's Mafia?
Jay Moore's Mafia. Use that however you like. And so, there's an orange orchard death in that film, and it's the exact same scene, except the Godfather figure puts an orange peel in his mouth and keeps going, a booga booga booga. And I think the kid murders him with like the pesticide thing that he's got, like it's something strange and so like that totally warped me for that scene. I was like, oh man, is this like the same thing? And it was a very bizarre experience to watch with that knowledge. And I was like, why isn't he saying a booga booga booga? Which I'd imagine is hard to do with an orange peel in your mouth.
And was it
we should have gotten orange
Orange
peels.
peels, yeah.
Oh god, the death at the end where they like lock the guy inside of the revolving door and then shoot him through it. A lot of those deaths, I was like, I remembered this from something, or it's been put into other films.
Yeah.
Like every death in that last little string is just so brutal.
I did write the note here just to go back a little bit. I think The Godfather would have had 1 billion followers on his ASMR channel. I think just with the voice. That's what it was channeling the whole time. Is like, what's a good ASMR example?
You have to go from one side to the other.
Yeah. Make you an offer you can't refuse. You come to me, come to me, come to me, come to me.
to me on the day of my
Oh boy,
daughter's
that's gonna be hard to get out of my head.
wedding. You massacred my boy. Boy.
Somebody is J-O-ing to that right now.
Yeah, you could upload just that clip and get like so many subscribers to this new channel.
This channel is going to turn into a Brando ASMR channel. So I will say this movie, I loved it a lot more than I expected to. I didn't think I'd like it as much. I was smiling, I'd say, for probably the first hour and a half of the movie. But I have to ask you, this is a new segment we're going to call Why Did Godfather Suck So Hard?
Okay.
So Sarah, would you like to go first and just say, why did this movie just suck so bad? This great movie.
It was so fucking long. And also, can we just talk about really briefly how it just shat on all the women in the movie? Just all of them. There's like Connie, Michael's sister, whose husband is abusing her.
Oh, I forgot Connie.
But then
that scene where she's breaking everything in the apartment.
she destroys everything. But then Michael kills her husband and then lies to her about it. And then he lies to Kay about it, and she knows, but she can't do anything about it. And he sort of cons Kay into marrying him.
Sure, yeah.
And then, of course, his first wife gets blown up.
Oh yeah,
We haven't talked about Italy at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole Italy segment is so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And it's also like where Michael starts to look like a dirtbag a little bit. Like he looks so clean,
Yeah.
kind of like good. And then like once he gets to Italy, you're just like, oh, I see where this is headed. There was one like really odd thing that I took note of is like when Michael first sees the chick that's going to become his wife, his buddy is like, you look like you just got struck with a thunderbolt or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was
Two
just like-
bodyguards.
yeah. And I was like, that's weird. And then they go to talk to her dad at the restaurant and the guy says it again. Like he was that proud of the metaphor he made. He was just like, this guy, you weren't there when I said this the first time, but this guy looks like he got struck by a thunderbolt. And then just more crickets. It was the weirdest thing. I don't know. Maybe it's an Italian expression. I don't know.
Well, then the dad goes off and like loses his shit, and then Michael, instead of doing like the American wooing that he probably did with Kay, I assume, which was first date, take a girl to an Italian wedding at the mafia. But the father comes out and he's just like, "This is what's gonna happen. You can either
Little dirtbag.
you can either die, or I could be your son. So here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna have some dinner. I'm gonna come over. I'm gonna fuck your daughter."
Yeah.
But then he like goes off and they're like doing that little walk into the sunset, and then the camera like sort of pans back and it's all the women in the family as chaperones like walking, and then like the bodyguards. And the bodyguards they end up fucking him in the end. Like the one bodyguard is the guy who turns on him and then blows up Apollonia.
Apollonia,
Yeah.
That's her name.
Yeah.
Apollonia, yeah.
Apollonia. Wow.
So RJ, why did Godfather suck so hard?
I got a real sweeping one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just that I call it GoldenEye N64 syndrome, where playing the video game GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64 when I was a kid, it was the greatest game of all time. Then we've had Halo, we've had just a whole bucket of first-person shooters, and going back, it's just like, well, this isn't quite perfected. So to that point, both of these films end with a big montage of a bunch of hits being handled and a bunch of people dying. In both cases, I think The Dark Knight did that exact same thing better. And it's just because like this laid the groundwork for all these other gangster movies and mob movies to follow. And so I think it sucks because it's the first out the door and therefore not as good as the ones that follow. Is that okay? Is that a cheat?
No. I think that works.
I think it's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. I think this one sucks so bad because The Rock ain't in this one.
Yeah. Where's The Rock?
The Rock.
The Rock, I
Dwayne
believe.
The Rock Johnson isn't in this one,
I
folks.
believe.
What was The Rock doing when they made Godfather?
The Rock came out 1972. I believe The Godfather released March 15th, 1972.
Mm-hmm.
2 months later, Dwayne Johnson was born.
Oh, he wasn't born yet.
Oh,
he
shit.
wasn't
Okay.
born.
Okay. I didn't
So
realize.
Okay. So, I mean, he could have been, he wasn't born yet, but I mean, if they would have postponed it a little bit,
CGI.
he could have been the baby at the baptism.
that's
Yeah,
true.
they
Yeah.
Put a wig on him.
Yeah.
It could have been the little baby. Okay.
Now that that's covered,
Never that's covered. Any final thoughts on The Godfather?
let me consult my notes.
For the audio listeners, RJ is now consulting his notes on his phone.
My first note was Godfather's cat is 10 out of 10 in this first scene. I don't remember what that means.
Oh, he's loving on that cat.
Yeah, it's like the cat's like rolling around like.
Marlon Brando was notorious for like having requests. I can assure you, Brando was on set like, I can't do the scene. I need a cat. I want a cat. And they're like, we're ready to film, Mr. Brando. Can we film? No, I need you to give me a cat. I want it to be a tabby.
A fat tabby that rolls over onto its back so you can scratch his little tabby tummy.
So overall, I love The Godfather. I think I loved it more than I expected.
Good. Yeah.
So let's just jump right into the second film of this
Right.
of this episode, which was The Godfather Part 2.
Is that the melody of
I
the?
think this episode's going to get claimed now.
Sorry, because it was a pitch perfect creation.
All right, I need you to hum royalty-free Italian music, please.
No,
No, not that one. We're getting all the claims. The Godfather Part 2, I really wanted this movie to open maybe a little bit more iconically. Just seeing the 2 pop up right after it, and then Michael's dumb face, it kind of took me out of it.
After somebody kisses his ring.
He's got, so as much as he looked like a dirtbag in Italy in the first one, he's full dirtbag looking at greasy, and he.
Whoa.
No slurs here.
Yeah.
I mean, like he had greased back hair.
Yes, okay.
And
That's like what the senator says in like one of the first scenes
I know,
where he's
yeah,
like,
that was actually me. I played that role, and I knocked it out of the park.
And this one opens at the fucking hugest first communion I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, you grew up Catholic, right?
Yeah.
What was your first communion like that?
Yeah, it was right on Lake Tahoe.
Right.
And there was about 100 people. Senators showed up. I got a $10,000 check
Wow.
for my college.
I got a
guess.
couple of $5 bills in envelopes. I was pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, compared to the first movie where it's this like awesome wedding, and then it's just like the most overblown first communion of all time.
Boy.
And you don't see Anthony that entire scene. It's his first communion, and he's nowhere to be found except for that initial moment where he takes the host.
Right. Man, yeah, that is really strange. Do you think, I mean, that must be based on something. Is that like do certain parts of Catholicism put that much importance on that sacrament of the first communion? That seems really strange to me.
We had a party, I remember.
Yeah,
but
I had a party.
But I mean, it was small. It was like a backyard gathering. So I guess the mafia's version of
They
that
go
would
all
be
out.
at Michael's house at Lake Tahoe.
Yeah. Did you notice that the organist played the Godfather theme at the first communion on the
No,
organ?
no. But we did get the
and then it turned into Pop Goes the Weasel.
Yeah, Pop Goes the Weasel.
That was great. I want to dive into this first communion so bad because we get so many great introductions to new characters. What is it, Frankie, the dude, the mustachioed gentleman?
Oh, yeah.
We meet him at this big swanky event, drinking out of a hose with another dude aiding in it. Like, why? How did he? My mind was so boggled by this introduction.
I was entranced by every time the Vito story started. I found myself getting pulled out of the Michael story a lot. I thought throughout the first half of the movie, I was just aching for another Vito moment.
So much more interesting.
Yeah.
It was great. Like,
Yeah.
and I thought even when it sort of skipped through time and it got to Robert De Niro, it was great. Like,
Yeah.
he
But, like,
did
this
such a
little-
great job.
This like young child, Ellis Island, he has smallpox. I guess he comes into smallpox. He's quarantined. Gorgeously done.
This might be a controversial opinion, and it might be because I don't know much about the original novel. I don't know how it all works, but wouldn't it make more sense to have the dual narrative between Vito's storyline and Michael's storyline from the first Godfather? Because like that's the parallel that's being drawn is like them kind of coming into that role. I was having trouble figuring out why these two storylines were connected in this movie.
And this movie, everything I read about it going into it was like, oh, it masterfully crafts like these two storylines, like Vito's rise and Michael's, I guess, his family deteriorating from under him. But everything in the Vito story was far more interesting to me. Yeah. And Vito felt like a noble protagonist, this boy who like has to escape and then is a self-made man. And every time I saw him, I was like, oh my God, this is the best part of this film. And then when we went back to Michael, I was pulled out a little bit like, oh yeah, somebody's trying to kill Michael. What's going on here? There are some iconic scenes still in that Michael section, though. I mean, when he gets the attack on his life and he finds like the picture his child wrote and is like, do you like this? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And he goes over to the desk to check. And like in that moment, I actually thought that was planted. Like I imagined in my head that there was some guy who like, yeah, I'm going to get some crayons and I'm going to make this cool picture of a boat.
Look how clever I am. I'm using my left hand to leave him off the trail.
It looks like shit, right? I know he's going to go to the desk, get the orange crayon, and in that moment, we're going to shoot him. But then later in the movies, his son's just like, did you like my picture? And I'm like, ah, shit, there goes my theory.
God, I love that theory so much. I also love the gangster who like is trying to make it shitty, accidentally ends up being pretty happy with it and like thinks about taking it back home with him.
Actually, it's pretty good.
I want to put it on my fridge.
I just drew this from memory. Looks like a car, you know? That's amazing.
But the when we go back to Vito and it's that scene of him meeting the friend who like steals everything.
Yeah.
And he's just like, hey, would your wife like a rug? And then he, like seeing Vito like kind of figuring out like how the world works in New York City. And he's just like, oh, okay, we're breaking into the house. This guy's about to shoot a police officer. And he just sort of goes with it. But for some reason, I still find him more noble than Michael.
It's so fascinating. And I don't really know what the root of this is, but they always warn you against like having passive protagonists. But that whole first section of Vito's storyline is he's being dragged along from place to place. And maybe it's just the performance that De Niro turns in, but you never once feel like he does something out of peer pressure. He commands himself like he's just like, I'm doing this because I've decided to do this.
Yeah.
And it kind of skirts that narrative issue. It's fascinating. He's amazing in this movie.
It's almost like he's sort of exploring the world.
Yeah.
By going along with whatever
That's
people
totally
tell him.
what it is.
He's trying to learn more about, because I sort of understood that about Vito's character even in the first film, is that he observes and likes to see how people react to things and how people act. And I think that's where Vito's power comes from, is that he's an observer. And I think to a certain extent, Michael inherits that, which is what makes him so good at being strategic.
Sure.
But Vito does it with a sense of soul and a sense of heart.
Yeah.
And he does it in order to support his family. Whereas Michael essentially at the end does it for himself.
Yeah, and perhaps Michael is a little more suspicious of people than Vito is in his exploration. I hadn't considered that. That actually helps my issue a little bit with why have this dual narrative, because I think that is something that we're witnessing by jumping back and forth. You're just seeing how these two dudes handle these situations differently and read people differently. And then back in the Michael camp, I did notice they ramped up the closing the doors on women in this movie quite a bit. And like, it's like every scene ends with like, oh, we'll just keep this closed. Just like no women allowed.
Connie has a lot more to do in this movie, and she's less, I guess she remarries, right? Cause,
Yeah,
because he says
She's remarried a couple times, I think.
Yeah.
Because she says that, like, well, her first husband was killed by Michael, so the second husband presumably is the one that she hasn't divorced yet when she brings the other guy in.
Yeah.
And the ink isn't dry in your divorce papers, and you're already with this guy.
Yeah.
It's like Michael's statement to her.
Yeah.
I really started enjoying the Michael story when he went to Cuba, though. And he's with
the guy's name is Hyman
Roth?
Roth.
Yeah.
Roth, yeah.
The first thing I made a note of with Hyman Roth is Hyman Roth knows how to lounge. When we first meet him, he's an old man, leg up in a wicker chair, like a chair that's not meant to be comfortable, and he has just made it comfortable.
You like watching the football game? My wife will make us some sandwiches. Sit down.
Freaking Hyman Roth, man.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him in that first scene, and then my God, the scene with the cake stood out too. Every time the camera was looking at a plate of cake, I was like, something's wrong with that fucking cake.
Yeah.
I was convinced it was poison.
I thought it was poison. I thought it was a bomb, because they say something about like, Michael says like the rebels had like a grenade on them.
Yeah.
So like when they tried to take them, the grenade went off, and all I could think was like, there's a bomb in the cake.
Right.
And then when he started passing it around, I was like, oh, there's poison in the cake. And he's just going to watch them all eat it. But then the moment Michael starts taking a fork of the cake, I was like, oh shit, that was just the filmmaker making me think something else was happening.
Hyman even has a line. He says, don't cut it until everybody's seen it.
The Hyman Roth plot was more of just an impetus so he goes to Cuba, and then I guess the Cuban Missile Crisis takes place, and so then they have the McCarthyism of the whole second act of the movie.
I really dug that. It was disorienting because they do a time jump and you don't know exactly how we got to this place. Is it right? It's right after the intermission, right? That's when
I
think so.
That?
And oh my God, when that intermission came, because the first film is like 3 hours and there's no intermission. I assume there wasn't in the original release of the film.
Yeah.
But when it happened in this, I thought I had watched the movie for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So when it came up, I was like, oh shit, there's got to be at least like an hour and a half left of this.
Well, that's because, I mean, it ends the first half of the movie on that great scene with Vito
Skulking on the rooftops.
Oh, yeah.
And he like unscrews the light bulb and he's got like the gun wrapped up.
Yeah.
And then he like hides it in which I've never seen that film, but for some reason as
chimneys,
it's happening,
he drops everything into the chimneys.
I was like, this is so iconic. Like I feel like I have a memory of this or it's been repeated somewhere.
I will say that this is so snobby film student of me, and I apologize. But like, again, going back to the GoldenEye N64 thing, when Don of the time, D-O-N, Don of the time, is screwing the light bulb in, and it cuts to De Niro, and it's flashing light and dark, I had this like, oh, is this symbolism for him going back and forth between the good and bad? And then I realized it was. But it's like, you can't, it's just like, this is where good movies were at the time. Good movies now, I'd like to think, are less blatant with their symbolism and stuff. And there's probably a version of me like maybe a week ago or a week from now where I'd be really into that. But you're like 2 hours into this fucking movie. And like once that's, it's like, no, it's not. It's that's what this is. And it hurt.
I must say, watching this film, there was numerous times where I was like, why is this movie on the top of so many top 10 lists?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things to love about it, and there's a lot of moments where I was like, did this really need to be in this movie? And you talked about liking the scenes in the courtroom. It completely took me out of the film when I saw that. When I saw them in the courtroom about like Michael being a mob boss or not, and they're having everyone come up, I was like, for some reason, a movie that isn't about a court case, when it jumps to a court case at like the 2.5 hour mark.
You saying that actually reminds me, when they first got there, I almost wrote the note, this is a court movie now. It felt like there was like a whole other thing. But by the time they got into the more interesting stuff with people contradicting their previous statements, that's when I got on board with that.
Yeah, I think when the senator from the beginning of the movie stood up and was just like, Italian Americans are the best people in the world. So and you people are doing a dishonor to Italian Americans having him sit there, and he just keeps going.
Well, that's because he quote unquote murdered
I forgot about
sex worker, and then
maybe murdered a sex worker.
Yeah, what do you think
murdered.
happened there? Because I was thinking like, oh, they somehow like tricked him into thinking he did, but
That's what
I
I thought.
Logistically, how would they do that? I mean, I guess like by drugging him or something. But he also seemed so like he seemed shocked, but he was also like, I get how I understand how we got here. Like what he was just like, we do dangerous things, we do crazy things, and
she was laughing the whole time. She was laughing.
So he almost sort of copped to it in the scene. It was interesting that was played ambiguously.
I mean, it's really conveniently lucky for Michael and the rest of the mafia that something like that happened.
Because of the convenience, maybe they might have done it and framed him.
Sure. Yeah. And the timing of it all. Because
he was trying to basically extort money out of Michael.
Yeah.
For the gambling license for the casino.
Yeah. And this is around the time in the movie where I made the note, wait, is Brando not in this movie? Because I didn't realize.
Well, there's a scene at the dinner table where it's like, is it like his birthday? Is it like Papa's birthday?
Yeah,
or something?
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Michael says like, no, I'm going to go off to the war or what? I'm going to join the Marines. And he's sitting there eating alone. And I was like, oh, we're going to see Brando. He's going to walk in. But they didn't have to pay Brando for this one.
Do you think that he didn't want to do it?
I don't know.
I gotta look that up because that was I say driving me crazy, but really it was just like I would have assumed that he would have been in this movie again. Like for all the iconography around that character, he must have been in at least 2 movies.
Yeah, I would imagine thinking about like how just kind of strange the way Brando's brain works. I think he might have I would expect he would be like no, I had my iconic end. Like, I shot that scene.
Sure.
My character's over. Like, we don't see him ever again. I want people to remember him by that last scene that I did.
Yeah.
I could see him as like a filmmaker in his head going like, I think that's the end.
To go. Well, so this brings me to oranges again. So the Godfather died with an orange peel in his mouth.
Yes.
And I think everything in this movie points to the rest of the Corleone family having a fear of oranges, because there is a point in the very first scene where the senator, I think, gives him, and he's like, "What's this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's an orange." And he's like, "Go see if those guys are hungry," or something like. It was really strange. And then later on, he's talking to the other brothers and stuff, and he's eating an orange like an apple, so cautiously, ever so cautiously. I think it's really ruined the relationship between the Corleones and the oranges, that whole event. Did you notice that scene where he was biting it like an apple?
He bit into the top of it. Yeah, he like peeled a little chunk off, and then he's
like slurping the inside, and it's all still. That was very upsetting to me.
Why buy the oranges? Why bring them? Like buy them at all? You know?
Why risk it?
I don't think we can not talk about the scene between Al Pacino and Kay, Michael and Kay, because oh my God, I did not expect that, and I felt like I was in a different movie.
Yeah, it was melodramatic. It was big.
I felt like I was in an acting class.
We can have another baby. No, we can't. I'm not going to have any more children.
She says it was an abortion?
Yeah.
No less than 5 times.
An abortion. It was an abortion.
Like our marriage. An abortion. It's aborted. The baby has been aborted. It's an abortion. You're an abortion.
Can I admit that I was moved by that scene?
Oh, my. I got to say, Diane Keaton, very good. Overall as an actress.
Yeah.
Michael's performance, smoldering intensity, and every time we cut back to him, he's just a little bit more like ferocious.
Sure.
And then the final cut, it's like this big jump between like, oh, I'll just do it for that. And then and he slaps like a fucking viper too.
Yeah.
It's this quick slap and you're like, holy shit.
It's so I hate to throw this on you, Sarah, but as the only woman in this room, I was watching it. I think the reason the abortion scene, like, I found moving is it was the first time she was doing something to halt, like something kind of powerful to take his power away. And it was something she had total control over. And yes, while the like hysterical screaming of the word abortion was kind of funny, I don't know. I found it moving because it was like finally she had control over this relationship with him. Did you feel any justice from that, or was it all too silly?
I thought that I felt like it was a scene that was clearly written by a man.
Sure, yeah, and appreciated by another man.
Yeah.
Like I think Diane Keaton did a great job with what she was given, but it definitely felt like a moment that was manufactured for Michael's reaction.
Sure. That's interesting.
Not so much for her agency. How can someone who clearly loves her own children as they are now go to such lengths to basically blame an unborn child?
Right.
Which, I mean, I'm not saying that she doesn't have that choice.
Yeah.
By all means.
But that is what you believe, though, and this is the platform for you to say is that like women shouldn't have the right to choose.
That's exactly. But I think what I find weird is that like it's gotten to that she has 2 other children,
sure.
And it's like this point, like 7 years later, that she.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I mean, Anthony's already going to be the heir to the family. So, like, her getting rid of a child is her saying, like, no more. I want no more of your family. But, I mean, the family will still continue.
It's out there, yeah.
She still had 2 children.
That's what I don't
Michael.
find weird. It's like, if your logic is that, I feel like she should just kill her other 2 children.
Yeah, that's the movie I want to see.
Godfather 3.
So, here's what I'll throw out there. If the arc of the first Godfather is Michael's descent into his family turmoil and the family business, then Godfather 2 is about Michael starting to wear ascots under his white shirts, which I'm a big fan of.
It was a good look.
Michael is a less interesting character than the Godfather is.
I would have totally watched a 3-hour movie that was a young Vito
Sure.
Corleone. A prequel movie, I think. Well, at the time, wasn't a thing that was done. But I think a Vito movie, I would have watched the shit out of.
Yeah.
I have to agree. I thought that Robert De Niro did a great job playing young Vito, and I wanted to see more of him. I thought that Michael's story was, to put it elegantly, garbage. And I was bored and wanted it to end.
So, we've come to the end of the first episode of the Best Movie Ever podcast. So we have to choose a movie that will not be going on to the next round, and a movie you're willing to watch again.
Oh, that's an interesting wrinkle for the next round.
Yes. Well, one of them you're going to have to watch again. You'll have to see. I mean, if The Godfather goes to the final round, you're going to have to watch it like five times.
Right.
So how about Sarah? Would you like to go first? Between the two films, what is your pick to move on to the next round?
My pick to go on to the next round is definitely going to be The Godfather. Part 1.
You almost started a drum roll after her answer.
Yeah. It was going to be Godfather. No, that's not how that's supposed to go, is it? The Godfather, any closing thoughts about why you really like The Godfather?
I think that The Godfather is iconic in a number of different ways. Marlon Brando gives an incredible performance that I think people characterize as being over the top, but there are so many small moments throughout it that he is just so like full of heart, and there it's the small moments that I remember the most. I think that the opening scene, it's like 30 minutes long, of the wedding, sets up all the characters so beautifully. It sets up the world. It sets the tone for the entire movie. I thought it was beautiful. My biggest criticism for the entire movie is just that it was long, and that was more just the style of the time than anything else.
RJ?
Yeah, I am going to vote for...
Here we go. This is the one.
The Godfather.
This one's The Godfather.
Yes, I'm going for The Godfather. Because all those reasons, and also just like Godfather 2 just felt less focused. And I even said already in this podcast, I'm eager to rewatch The Godfather. So
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of is what.
I'm gonna put my foot up like Hyman Roth when I say
Okay,
this last one.
do a Hyman Roth.
Just the camera's going right underneath.
I mean, it doesn't really matter because our votes have already
Your vote's
decided.
already, yeah. But anyway, The Godfather, 100%. I wanted to like The Godfather too. Once it began, I was like, this is the movie that people say is the best sequel of all time.
Yeah.
I strongly disagree.
Yeah.
I think The Godfather 2 kind of sucked shit at times. And I'm offending somebody this is their favorite movie.
Sorry, boomers.
Sorry, you big boomer. But the big boomer's wrong this time because Godfather 2 was just overall not as good of a film. And The Godfather 1, so many iconic moments. I would watch it again. I was smiling for about an hour and a half, 2 hours of the film. The Godfather 2, I was like, I was looking at my emails and stuff. It just wasn't as good. It didn't hold my attention. You put that movie on like a Sunday afternoon, you leave, you come back, and you haven't missed much, in my opinion.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say The Godfather for sure goes on to the next round.
That's it. It's official.
And it just burned The Godfather too. Just burn it.
I'm fine with it. Granted, man, if we could just go back in time, make the whole movie just Vito Corleone young as Robert De Niro, because Robert De Niro was a
skinny, sexy Robert De Niro.
He was skinny and sexy, and just
He was very attractive.
He was very attractive and
Very
didn't
attractive.
speak English like at all. Wild.
I'm sad because I wish there were more of that movie. The
I wish that movie
imaginary
existed,
in my
yeah.
mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, if you just pull those parts out, you still got like an 80-minute movie for
Yeah.
sure, right?
No intermission on this one.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for joining us for the first episode of the Best Movie Ever podcast. So next episode, we're going to be watching...
Chicago
Renee
And-
Zellweger.
and the Broadway Melody.
The Broadway Melody. I have not seen the Broadway Melody. I've seen Chicago. Not excited about that one.
The Broadway Melody came out in 1929, so it's going to be...
Wow.
That's an oldie. That's an old movie.
It's also the second best picture to ever win the title of best
Weird.
picture.
Interesting.
Yeah. So next episode, we'll be watching the Broadway Melody in Chicago. And please join us for our very special Christmas in July episode, which is going to be Kirk Cameron Saving Christmas.
Okay, I'll come back for that one.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. This has been the Best Movie Ever podcast. I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.